All right. Hello. Welcome to the Current Review Podcast, Week 3. Today we are suffering from a slight power outage, so I'm not in my normal studio. And today, more importantly, I have Richard Hart on. And he's been driving electric cars for nearly 10 years now. He's owned some really interesting vehicles, super high mileage ones. And I just figured this would be a really cool conversation to have. So thank you for coming on, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I'm glad you're safe from all the hurricanes and stuff that's happening up there.
Yep, I'm all right. It's really bad in some areas though, but it'd be nice to have an electric car with V2G charging right now.
Yes.
But regardless, I think one of the first things I just want to talk about is your experience with electric cars, because people are concerned about buying used electric cars. I've bought a couple used electric cars before, but I think you have way better experience and way earlier experience than me or pretty much anyone else I know in this. So when did you first get your first used electric car, and what has your experience been with it?
So the very first used electric car I bought was at the very beginning of 2015. I bought a 2012 Mitsubishi i-Miev. So I'm kind of an early adopter and of one of those like smaller electric vehicles. So anyone who hasn't heard of a Mitsubishi i-Miev before, go Google search it. It's a pretty small car. Like Mitsubishi kind of made it as a compliance car back in the day, but it was actually pretty decent because it came with DC fast charging. It came with heated seats. It has a DVD player in it and built-in navigation. It has some really cool stuff with it. And Stephanie and I, my wife's name is Stephanie, we were excited to purchase an electric vehicle. We've both seen them in the past. And our first introduction with the i-Miev was when we went to go see an electric vehicle event in Tucson. We both lived in Arizona for a while. I actually have my NAU shirt on right now, but we both lived in Arizona for a while going to NAU. And we were in Tucson and we saw an i-Miev there. We're like, this is like the coolest little car. Like, we want one of these. They were really hard to find in Arizona. We actually ended up purchasing it used from California, from Mitsubishi, from El Cajon Mitsubishi, which I thank them. They were amazing about getting us that car. We paid $400 to ship it out to Arizona, and a super cheap shipping out here, which was great. I encourage everyone, if you buy a used EV, if you can buy it out of state, don't be afraid to do that, because we got such an amazing deal on our i-Miev and our Model X of purchasing out of states, which is kind of how we went with it. And yeah, we've had that for 10 years now. It's been a fantastic little car for us.
Yeah, I bet you probably got a good deal on shipping it because it's so small.
Yeah, well, so we paid $400 to ship it out from El Cajon, which is out near San Diego, and ship it out here. And one of the reasons it was so cheap was not just because it was small, it's because they actually asked us, like, hey, are you cool with like potentially waiting a couple of weeks if we put it on a truck and ship it with a bunch of other vehicles? And we're like, yeah, if that's going to save us money, then let's do it. So it's cool that dealerships will offer that with used EVs.
Cool. So you've had this Mitsubishi i-Miev for 10 years now. What has the ownership experience been like? Have you noticed any significant like battery degradation or stuff along those lines?
Yeah, so not too long after we bought it was actually towards the end of 2015. The battery actually failed on it,
Really?
under warranty, which is great. It was under warranty, but it did fail on it, and they replaced it. It's been a fantastic experience. I think for some of those earlier models, some of those batteries would fail, but they were all under warranty, which is great. It's been a great ownership experience up to this point. You know, in Phoenix, having a small car like that, when it hit 117, 118 degrees in Phoenix, you see a lot of gasoline cars that be on the side of the road, like overheating and having other issues in the heat, and little i-Mievs is trucking right through. It did fantastic. Your range, you have the air conditioning blasting, so the range is cut down a little bit, but for the most part, like, it was a fantastic. We haven't had, actually, besides that in warranty repair, we haven't had any repairs on the i-Miev up to this point, which has been really, really great. It's been a fun little car to have.
That's interesting. So kind of adopting an electric vehicle this early on, were there any struggles you had with driving one? And I guess, what is like your experience been seeing the landscape of EV charging and infrastructure adapting so far?
So I think with the i-Miev, when we first bought it, back in 2015, the infrastructure wasn't as robust as it is today, right? So we didn't have a level 2 station at home. We only had level 1 charging initially, which it has a 16 kilowatt battery. So we were plugging it in at 7 p.m. at night and then unplugging it at 7 a.m. in the morning on level 1, right? Which was that would fill the battery up, right? So it's getting you
Yeah,
15 kilowatts.
almost.
So for us, level 1 did a great job for us. My wife actually worked for ChargePoint for a while
Okay,
as well.
cool.
And so we were a really early adopter of one of their first like level 2 home stations as well. And so I think it was towards the end of 2015 or early 2016 we got the level 2 station installed. And that made things easier for us as well, being able to drive around. And we used to go to a lot of baseball games with it, and there was a level 2 station that was right there at the stadium that we just go park at and charge and go into the stadium. With the i-Miev, we didn't do a lot of DC fast charging back then. It was mostly charging at home and then doing level 2 charging at like destination spots. It really wasn't until recently when I started taking 1,000-mile road trips with it that I started DC fast charging. I don't know. I think you and I had a conversation prior to this offline about how I took a 1,100-mile road trip with it down to San Diego and back, which my wife,
That's insane.
She's still thinking I'm crazy for doing. Like it was.
How long did it take? How many charging stops do you have to do?
35 charging stops round trip.
35. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. And then how much real world range were you getting at that point?
So I was getting around. The i-Miev has a terrible drag coefficient. So once I get above 65, 70 miles an hour, my range is cut down to like 37 to 40 miles, right? So I was stopping every 25 to 30 miles, which is why I charged so many times. But I will say that so it took me, I know I'm crazy. It took me 3 days to do that trip, right? But on that first day, I drove 500 miles in that first day. And so for me, like I took a 60-mile range car and drove it 500 miles in one day. And so for me, it was more of a proof of concept that like you don't necessarily need to go out and spend $100,000 on a 500-mile range car, right? That you could go spend $2,000 or $3,000 on, which is how much about an i-Miev is nowadays, like a used one, and get a car that, if you're crazy enough as me, you could potentially drive 500 miles in one day if you wanted to. It's a fun little car.
Interesting. So now you had the i-Miev, and then you got the Chevy Bolt, and I've driven a Chevy Bolt for a little bit. I actually have one right now because my Model 3 was T-boned, so I have a Chevy Bolt as a rental car. And I honestly, I think the Chevy Bolt's honestly probably one of the best value EVs on the market, and especially because like even though charging's not that great, it's like it can actually do like 260 miles of range like in real world driving. Like it's super efficient. I think people don't really give it credit for how efficient it is.
It is, yeah. So we drove our Chevrolet Bolt. We bought it we put our reservation in September of 2016. So it tells you how much we wanted one. We didn't get it until the first part of 2017, but we drove it 100,000 miles in 3 years before we ended up selling it and eventually got a Model X. But we took that car, that Bolt EV, on so many long road trips. The best one we took it on was we drove with our kids and our dogs. We had 2 kids, my wife and my dog, in the Bolt EV. This is 2017. We drove it up to Seattle and then drove it to Yellowstone National Park, Grand Teton National Park, the Dinosaur National Monument, the Bonneville Salt Flats, and then drove it all the way back across Utah and Nevada and back over to California here in Sacramento. And that was just an epic road trip. But yeah, I miss that car so much. You're right. Like, so the older ones only got 238 miles of range, right? But because it's such an efficient car, we were pretty consistently getting 300 miles of range out of it. Most of these driving behind semi trucks, and we also kept the tire pressure a little higher on it as well. But yeah, it's a fun little car. I miss it a lot.
Yeah, no, because especially like when I've been driving it recently, because I had one for a little bit over the summer, and then that was a rental when me and my friends were living out in the Bay. We just split a rental, so put about 1,500 miles on it then, and now I'm in it again. And yeah, it's a really good car overall. And I can see, like, I think in my latest range estimates, I was looking at about 270 miles with a mix of pretty fast highway driving and like a little bit of like country road driving. And that's just like, because the thing is, it's like even on some of these like older Teslas, they don't really get their EPA range, but like the Chevy Bolt does, like, and that's really impressive. And I think especially when you can get them now for like the $10,000 to $15,000 range for obviously older ones, but you can still get like the new body style refresh for like under 20 easily, even under 16, 17 in some cases. And yeah, for a lot of people, that's pretty much all the car you need if you're not driving some insane distance. But like, even if it's your only car and you're doing some road trip, it's like it's still possible in the bulk. It's just going to require a little bit more planning.
Yeah, it's definitely good to consider. Like Americans drive an average of 270 miles a week, right? So when you think of you getting that kind of range out of that, you're like, you're going to charge it once a week if you're driving like that, right? So it's like it's a fantastic, economical, easy to drive electric vehicle for sure.
Definitely. So now after the Chevy Bolt, you got into a Model X and you bought a used Model X. And I think for a lot of like the EV nerds out here, we know that Model X's are the Teslas that are most prone to issues. So when you were buying this, what were you considering when you were looking at it? And how did you buy it when it was still under the basic warranty as well?
Yes, it was still under all the warranties.
Okay, cool. So could you talk me through your buying process with it?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we went after the Model X instead of the Bolt EV was because my wife had started a business and she needed a vehicle that could tow pretty heavy trailers. And we had considered putting a tow hitch on the Bolt EV, but we're like, well, a lot of people, if you guys get a chance to check out a Facebook group called Electric Vehicles That Tow Trailers, you'll see people put tow hitches even on little i-Mievs and Nissan Leafs.
That's insane.
Things. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. But ultimately, we wanted something that could tow something bigger. So we got the Model X. Initially, when we were looking around, we're like, okay, we know we can't afford a new one because we couldn't back then. Model X is brand new. We're still selling for, $115,000, $120,000, right? They're cheaper nowadays. But so like, we want to get a used one. And we're like, we know we can go out of state because we know we bought an i-Miev out of state. So we know that process of buying a used electric vehicle out of state is pretty easy process and we feel comfortable doing it. So we went on cars.com and we saw a Model X that was in Utah and we reached out to the person and they did like a tour of everything of it, like a cool virtual tour, showed us the entire vehicle, showed us like what it was on. And they didn't have as much knowledge as we would have liked about them. I felt like when we bought our i-Miev, they had at least a little more knowledge about it. The dealership in Utah had zero knowledge. They knew nothing about electric vehicles. I also don't think they knew what they had either because, used Model X's back then, most of them were going for like $70,000, $80,000 for what we wanted. And we got ours for $50,000. It was a huge discount we got it for.
Wow.
It was because the demand for electric vehicles in Utah was really low back then. And so you could get them really cheap back then, which is why I encourage everyone to go to state and purchase your electric vehicles. But yeah, once we got it in, initially the dealership told us that it came with free supercharging. Turned out that wasn't the case. Which one of the things that we ended up finding out, so we pulled the Carfax on it and turned out that it had been returned to the bank. And then it went through an auction sites and then the dealership bought it from the auction site. And then when they sold it, that process of going through the auction site stripped the free supercharging on it.
Wow.
Which wasn't a big deal for us, right? Because we were getting a $30,000 discount compared to what they're going for, like here in California. And we're like, at 40 cents a kilowatt, it's going to take us like 500,000 miles to make up 30 grand in the savings we're getting. So it really wasn't that big of a deal for us. And yeah, it was just an easy experience. The same thing with the i-Miev. They gave us a discount for shipping it out here with other cars and got it in. And at the time, the biggest thing we ran into is that it did not have the MCU upgrade, which is something I encourage everyone to look at when you're purchasing it. The MCU one, it was probably great for its time when it came out in 2016. It was not good when we bought it. It was just super slow and lagging and had a bunch of issues. So one of the first things we did is upgrade it up to MCU 2. We immediately saw like a bump in faster charging. The UI experience was way better on it. And it was just simpler to drive, honestly, with that upgrade. So it was worth every penny of the $1,500 to do that.
And then what year Model X's have the MCU 2 upgrade already installed? Like, is it 2017 when the autopilot computer came out?
I think it was late 2017 when they did MCU 2.
Okay. Because you can kind of see on those older Model X's, some of them have don't have the like side cameras on them, and then some of them do. And are those related? Because I think that's with the new autopilot or the FSD hardware.
Yeah. So it was in, I think, November 2016 when they came out with the version that had the side cameras on it. And then I believe MCU was upgraded not too long after that is when they came out with those.
Okay,
So yeah,
interesting.
2017, I think you're right, is when they started making MCU2.
Yeah.
But it's worth every penny to get MCU2 upgrade on the older Model X's for sure.
Okay.
So that made a huge difference. One of the things we ran into initially when we got it was, and something I wish I would have learned earlier than this, was the inner wear on the tires, because the person did not keep the tires properly inflated, or they were taken off hard at stoplights, whatever the case may be. That was a lesson we learned initially, but we figured out that if we keep the tire pressure higher on the X, so we usually keep our tire pressure around like 49 psi,
Okay.
as opposed
Wow. That's really
to
high.
really has it at, because it goes up to a max of 51. Obviously, we're never going to go up near that, but when we kept it up near 49 psi, we noticed that instead of getting like 30,000 miles out of our tires, we're starting to getting like 55,000 miles out of our tires, and we get a significantly more mileage out of our tires. So that was a lesson we learned early on, that because that first set of tires you replace, they're like $400 a tire. We're like, oh my gosh, this is such an expensive.
That's how much they are. That's
Model X
insane.
tires are expensive, right? So it's like, well, we need to figure out how we can do this, and so we learned to keep it in chill mode, keep it in range road mode, don't take off hard at stops, and then keep the tire pressure higher, and you'll get 50,000 plus miles out of each set of tires, right? So that was a huge lesson we learned with it.
Yeah. Well, I guess on a car like the Model X, when the tires are that, because that's the thing. It's like with an EV, it's so much fun just to like floor the accelerator at stop signs and stuff. And yeah, that's the unfortunate part, is it wears down on the tires. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm trying to think, because well, I guess if you have a rental car, then it's all right.
Yeah, right. It's tough.
But yeah, no, when you're talking like $400 per tire, it's like, all right, you got to be careful now.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I think for most people, when that first expense they hit, like those tires can get expensive quickly for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting to look too. Like some cars are really cheap for tires, but then some, like, so the Volvo and Polestar. So the Volvo C40 Recharge, because I was looking at these recently, Volvo C40 Recharge and Polestar 2 are about the same price used. You can get them for around like 25,000. But the Polestar 2 has 20-inch performance tires on them if you get the performance pack. And those tires are not that expensive, surprisingly, for like a sports car. You can get like nice grippy summer tires for around like $150 a set, or sorry, $150 a tire. But then the Volvo C40, so same base car, just different size tires, different size wheels and tires. The Volvo's ones are like $350 starting, which is just insane. And it's like, it's the same car. It's like, so for me, I think like that would even be a buying factor to buy the Polestar over the Volvo, is because like $150 versus $400 a tire is a crazy difference.
It is a huge difference. Yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing for sure. I think even for the Bolt EV, right? So we replaced the tires once in that 100,000 miles. We got around 60,000 miles with that first set that we had on there. And yeah, I remember those are 18-inch rims, I think, on the Bolt EV, and they were pretty cheap. Like you're saying, they were like that $150
little eco tires.
Like it was eco price. It's like super cheap. So yeah, the Model X, that's something that I think surprises me. I think one of the reasons Model X is more expensive too is because it's got the heavy. They're supposed to be heavy tires, right?
Yeah,
I can't go take a 20-inch tire from a Model 3 or another car and put them on. The X has to have the heavy load tires.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that is just a good buying thing to think about. Like, so whenever I look at cars online, it's I always go to TireRack.com and then just price out the tires, because that is a big deal, especially if you're keeping the car for a long time, because you get a lot more sets. So yeah, so when you bought the Model X, how many miles did it have, and then how many do you have now on it?
So it had about 50,000 miles on it when we bought it, and now it has 250,000 miles on it. So we've done 200,000 miles in 4 years.
Wow. And then, so where have you driven this in 4 years?
We've kind of gone all over with it. My wife mostly drives up her business. She has a business called Green Gifts Elk Grove. It's a really cool business where she does distribution stuff between zero waste shops. So which is kind of cool. So zero waste shops can now they sell like zero waste stuff, but then they can say, hey, my stuff was delivered here by a zero waste vehicle. And so it's kind of a cool thing, right? So she does a lot of driving up to Seattle and then down to San Diego. We've done drives out to Indiana with it as well. So we've also driven up through Montana and North Dakota with it, and we've kind of driven all over the place with it. So back in 2022, 2022, we drove 69,000 miles in 1 year with it.
That's insane.
We used a 23,000 kilowatts that year in our Model X, which is absolutely insane. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, we drive that car a lot and take epically long road trips with it.
Interesting. So what trim do you have? Do you have the 75D or the 90?
90D.
90D. Okay. So how much real world range are you looking on it? So what was like, wasn't the EPA like around, I'm honestly, I can't remember the EPA off the top of my head. Was it like
257 was the original range.
Okay.
257 was the original range. And right now it's down to 218 miles.
And can you actually get 218 like in real world driving or?
So I think for rear wheel driving, so we typically will drive it until it hits 10% and then recharge it up to 80%, right? So if we're doing that, rear wheel range is like 150 miles. So we're basically charging every 150 miles. If I were to drive it from 0 to 100, I honestly think I probably could get 220 miles out of it. But obviously I'm never going to do that. So I'm just staying between that 10% to 80% because the 2016 maxes out at around 170 kilowatts, right? So it doesn't go up to the 250 the newer ones do. And so with that little bit slower charging, we try to stay within that 10% to 80% range. So we're not charging for a super long time.
Okay, cool. And then, so with the Model X, with gaining all these miles, have you noticed any like maintenance issues with that, or like, so would you recommend it, or would you recommend like another used Model X to like a friend?
I'd highly recommend used Model X. I'm honestly, like, even with ours having 250,000 miles, I'd recommend it to someone because like we really haven't had a lot of maintenance issues with it. It's still on its original battery, right, and the original rear motor. The front motor was replaced under warranty. Just after it hit 200,000 miles, the front motor was replaced. So, I mean, I got 200,000 miles out of the front motor. So it's hard for you to complain about, even me to complain about.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
The only significant repairs we've had on it was the air conditioning unit was replaced under warranty when it hit 100,000 miles. And then
they covered that under warranty.
There was
wouldn't that be basic? Or would that be
it had an extended warranty on it. So that under that extended warranty.
Was that third-party warranty you bought, or was this?
It was a Tesla warranty back then, which was a nice surprise. Yeah. The dealership did not tell us about it, or they didn't know about it. We were fully expecting to pay for that repair, and which when it failed is a fun story. But we were actually towing a very heavy trailer from like 500 miles from down south of LA up to Sacramento, and it failed while we were towing our trailer. Which on the older Model X's, it uses air conditioning to cool the batteries. So our supercharging was cut down to like 75 kilowatts and wouldn't go above that. So that was towing a trailer. But anyway, so we didn't know there was an extended warranty on it. So we took it into the Tesla dealership, the Tesla service center, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's covered under warranty." I was like, "I had no idea it had extended warranty. This makes us so happy though. I don't have to pay for it."
Interesting. So those were mainly the big things, or like what about the Falcon Wing doors?
So the Falcon Wing doors haven't had any issues outside of the outside of the seals being replaced. And so that was a fun surprise to figure out how expensive the seals were to replace. We had no idea. So the seals failed at around 225,000 miles, which is, again, never one of those things. If they're failing every 225,000 miles, I really can't complain that much, right? Because what was it? I think the NHSTA, I think they say that the average ownership of a vehicle is between like 160 and 180,000 miles here in the United States. So it's like, those things are failing well beyond when most people keep their vehicles, right? Yep. But that being said, those seals for both of them were $2,400 to replace.
$2,400. Wow.
That was expensive. Yeah, that was an expensive thing. Because then we asked them, like, why is it so expensive to replace those Falcon Wing seals? They said it was because they have to replace the entire window assembly as well with the seals.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's if you keep a Model X up beyond 200,000 miles, something you have to keep in mind. And the reason why we knew they were leaking is because we took it through a car wash. We figured out they were leaking pretty quickly.
Wow.
But yeah, outside of that, we had a passenger door handle fail. That's about it. And then we replaced the brakes. We replaced the brakes at around 210,000 miles.
That's a good brake lifetime.
Yeah, right. Getting 200,000 miles.
Such a heavy car. Yeah.
It would probably last longer if we didn't tow trailers either, right? But yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So now you've had all these electric cars for almost a decade, such a long time.
Mhm.
So how has it been like witnessing the transition of the automotive industry, switching to more EV options? And like, what do you think now when you look on cars.com and it's like, well, you can get Kia EV6, you can get Kia EV, not like just so many different Hyundai EVs, you can get Ford Mach-E, just so many different options now compared to several years ago when it's like, if you wanted an affordable EV, it's like you get an i3, used i3, Nissan Leaf or Chevy Bolt, and that was it.
Yeah, so I think like in the beginning, right? So when we first started shopping for EVs, I think you had like early on you had the Nissan Leaf, you had Ford Focus EV, the Mitsubishi
Yes.
i-Miev, Toyota Brava 4 EV. I think you had the Fiat 500e, the BMW i3, Spark EV, the Mercedes
Spark.
B class,
Mercedes
right?
B250E. Yep.
Yeah, right. Which, if you were willing to get the JDOMA upgrade, they were halfway decent, but maybe not so much if you didn't have the upgrade on them.
Mhm.
But if you notice something about all those cars, though, they were all compliance cars, right? They were all
Yep.
cars that had 60-mile range, 80-mile range, right? They were all really short range cars. Some of them had DC fast charging, like the i-Miev, right?
Yep.
So that I think that transition's been really fun to watch, to go from the small compliance EVs that were getting 16, 80-mile range. I think we're still some parts of me want to bring back the smaller cars because I think they're more
Mhm.
efficient, better for the environment. But it's been great seeing like the longer range electric vehicles come out now, right? You see something like the Lucid Air that's got the
Yep.
upgraded model has like what 518 or some odd miles,
512. Yep.
probably 12 miles of range. I mean, that's an epic amount of range. I think about that. It's like that's like what 8-10 hours of driving without stopping, or maybe even more than that, right? Like driving, that's a
Yeah.
long time to drive without having to stop, right? So that seeing that kind of
Yeah.
range is fantastic. And even with the charging too, right? Like some of the vehicles are now taking 350 kilowatt charging now, right? Or even
Mhm.
like the super high end EVs like the Rimac Navaras and things that could take 500 kilowatt charges. I'm like, man, like I was happy getting a 50 kilowatt charge back when I bought the i-Miev, and now you have cars that
Mhm.
are taking 500 kilowatt charges. So that's been a really fun transition to see, um, and to see the EV infrastructure start to match that as well, and seeing like charge points 250 kilowatt stations that they're coming out with, right? And then obviously Electrify
Mhm.
America is 350 kilowatt stations. um, I think it's been fantastic seeing both of those finally starting to line up, and you can actually take longer road trips and actually see those types of charging speeds. um, Tesla's been doing that for a while, right? You've been able to
Mhm.
get their original 120 kilowatt and then 150 and 250 kilowatt stations. They've been doing that for a while, and it's been really fun to see that happening with the rest of the EV industry now.
Mhm. Definitely. So, how do you think the charging infrastructure right here, or compared to when you started, obviously the infrastructure is much more advanced, but do you think it's sufficient now, or how much more work do you think has to be done with EV infrastructure to get more people behind the wheel of EVs?
I think I think you have to kind of define charging infrastructure a little bit, and I say that because most people, when you think of charging infrastructure, they kind of think of it like to do a gasoline car, right? So a gasoline car,
Mhm.
you can't gas a gasoline car at home or work,
Yes.
school, or anywhere else, right? So people think of electric vehicle infrastructure, they immediately think of interstate infrastructure, right? Because that's
Mhm.
the only way you can gas a car up. But realistically, with an electric vehicle, that infrastructure
When
includes
the
getting
car's
a place.
idle, you could be charging it.
Right, you charge at home, you charge at school, you charge at work, you charge like your destinations when you go into the grocery store, right? So you charge like everywhere. So when I think of that type of infrastructure, I think there's definitely still a lot of work to be done. I think highway charging infrastructure has come a long ways.
Mhm.
When we took our Bolt EV on that road trip, we did that road trip in 2020. That was a almost 5,000-mile road trip we took in the Bolt EV. We were driving across southern Montana and then down through western Wyoming, right? So the charging infrastructure was really sparse back then, like to the point where like had we not been able to charge at some of those places, and we were going to like Jackson Hole and then down through Salt Lake City out to Dinosaur National Monument, we would have been stranded, right? We were taking a big
Yeah.
risk doing that back in 2020. It's come a long ways now, right? So like there's now charging stations kind of everywhere now, right? You can drive across Texas now, you can drive across like the Midwest. There's a lot of cool places you can drive with infrastructure. I think it still needs a lot of work though.
Mhm.
I still don't like the fact that a lot of places you stop at, there's like only 2 or 3 charging stations there, right? I think that's
Yep.
something that Tesla's done right over the years of having, 10, 15, 20 stalls in some locations. Even some locations now have like 200 stalls, right?
Yeah, I've seen that. That's insane.
Fireball, or one of the ones along like the 5, I think, has like ridiculous amount of stations now. But I think we need to improve that, right? You typically go to a gasoline station and you typically don't see anything less than 6, 10 to 12 stalls. And I think that's something we need to improve upon. I think we also need to improve level 1 charging. I'm a big advocate for level 1 charging. It's something that's overlooked significantly right now for whatever reason, right? So I think of you and I had a conversation kind of offline about this, of how I do a lot of talks at like high schools and things about not just about electric vehicles, but I love talking about theater and all kinds of different things. And I can't tell you how many times my high school students, I hear them talk about how they want an electric vehicle, but they can't buy one. You can find them for like really cheap old Nissan
Yeah.
Leafs and Mitsubishi i-Mievs for $2,000, $3,000 within the budget of a high school student, right?
Yeah,
But they
and
can't buy
you know
one.
that. Yeah, well, and you know too, when you're buying a car that price, you know something probably not crazy wrong is going to happen with them. Like if you buy some like $3,000 gas car that could need new manifolds or something like that.
Yeah, right. So and for high school students, one of the reasons that I always get that they're not buying electric vehicles is because, their parents either aren't willing to pay for the infrastructure to install anything at home, and they don't have anywhere to charge when they go to like school and things. And so
Yeah.
I've made a big push to try to get high schools, like our local high schools around here, and such, try to install level 1 charging, because if a high school student gets there at 7 a.m. and leaves at 4 p.m., right? So if they're there for that 9 hours of time, right? So they're going to get a minimum of 10 to
9
11.
kilowatt hours. Yeah.
If you're getting, say, if it's charging at 1.3 kilowatts, they're getting about 5 kilowatts per hour. That's 40 miles of range they're going to get while they're at school. High students live like 2-3 miles from school.
Yep.
Like 40 miles would be more than enough for high school students to own vehicles to drive to school and back. And so level 1 infrastructure is something that's, I think, is severely overlooked, and something we should invest in more because it's so cheap.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I think even when I was interning at Lucid this summer, and they had free level 1 charging there, they had like 6 spots. It was literally just a power outlet that you plug your car in, but it was free. And energy is pretty expensive in California. So, and I guess the other thing to consider, it was about 4 miles round trip from where we were living to Lucid. So I'd be there for like 8-9 hours. And just like you said, it's like 10, 11 kilowatt hours you get. I'm getting, if I was getting like 3-4 miles per kilowatt hour, we're talking like 30-40 miles of range while the car's just sitting there at work. And while all the other gas cars, they're also sitting there, nothing's happening to them. But
Right.
here we're actually gaining energy and gaining more energy than I used to just drive to work. So, and even if it was like I just totally broke even with my distance, it's like, well, obviously, why wouldn't you do that? It's like, it's energy right there, and it's easy to set up. It's not like you don't need to really install new breakers and stuff, just outlets for the most part.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing. And I think we talk about the whole high mileage EVs being cheaper as well. So like students, you mentioned kind of repairs, right? Like students should not be afraid of purchasing high mileage electric vehicles, right? Like I would be super apprehensive about purchasing a gasoline car with 150,000 miles. I feel like electric cars are prime at 150,000 miles. So I think that's, I think about like one of the first cars I ever had was a Toyota Supra, and I remember it was an old 86.5 Supra, but I remember when it hit around that 150,000 mile mark, I remember it needing quick side story, that it ended up needing a head gasket on it, right? Which is common for those to go on those. And I remember a mechanic wanted to charge me $3,500 to replace a head gasket on it. And I remember thinking back then, it's like, this car is worth like $5,000. I'm not going to pay $3,500 to replace a head gasket on it, right? Which is one of the reasons why that average is for why when people keep cars is between that 150 and 175,000 miles, right? Electric vehicles, you just don't have those types of things that fail, right? I mean, you can, right? I mean, that's a common question that I get a lot is, how much does a battery cost on some like a high mileage electric vehicle, right? And so I always say that, like, yes, they can be expensive. I think on the Model X, it's around $11,000 to $12,000 to replace the battery on it. But for me, I know 3 people now with Teslas that have over 400,000 miles on their Tesla still on the original battery. Obviously, we're still on
Yeah.
our original battery at 250,000 miles. So if you're going to tell me that I'm going to pay $10,000 to replace a battery every 400,000 miles, I'm going to say yes. Thank you very
Mhm.
much. Give me that every day, because I'm going to spend way more of that to make a gasoline car last 400,000 miles.
Yeah, because the
So
thing, you compare a Model X to like what, maybe a Mercedes GLE, something like that, and that car, I could imagine one with 250,000 miles would probably have a lot of money put into maintenance in that vehicle,
yeah,
probably a new engine or transmission at that point.
when you think about some of the things, right? So you have things like engine air filters, fuel filters, spark plugs, distributors, piston rings, like timing belts, coolant hoses, head gaskets, oil rings, like drive belts and catalytic converters. And I have like a whole list of things that don't exist on electric cars that you have to replace around that time when it hits that mark, right? So just
Mhm.
you're going to end up spending 10 grand, like you said. But they used to mention the Mercedes, like you're going to spend that much. The head gasket on my old Supra being $3,500. I mean, that was one repair. Like that's not the mention that it was probably going to eventually need a transmission replacement. It's eventually going to need to have the oil seals replaced, which the oil seals replaced, like you have to take the whole bottom half of the engine apart, which is going to cost you probably 2 grand in labor, right? So it's
Yep.
just, yeah, I mean, a $10,000 battery replacement is, from in my opinion, it's just peanuts compared to another gasoline car that would be up at 200, 2 or 300,000 miles, right? Um,
Mhm.
so for a high school student looking to buy a $2,000 or $3,000 older high mileage electric vehicle, go for it, and then encourage your high school to get level 1 charging.
Definitely. Yeah, 100% agree with level 1 charging and level 2 as well. Obviously, it's a little bit more money, but like I think it just makes so much sense for businesses and workplaces because it's like it doesn't only cost that much money for them, but for the person driving the car, it's a huge perk. And just factoring in that when the car's sitting there, it's just going to be gaining energy while it's sitting there. It's just a really cool concept to me. I really like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say I always also think about, like, when you say level 2 charging, I picture a day in the future where you have a parking lot full of cars and you have V2G set up with those level 2 stations as well, or in this case, like the vehicle to V2C, right? So vehicle to, if you buy corporate buildings, right?
mhm,
Like industrial buildings, and think of the idea of like that entire parking lot basically being potentially a battery for a giant building, right? Where like if you have a giant truck that has a 200 kilowatt battery and you're like, oh, I know I can get, if a business is willing to potentially pay you to use your battery on your
mhm,
car, you can imagine like coming out and potentially like not really making money per se, but like getting paid for them to potentially use a battery. If you have solar at home that's giving you free
mhm.
energy to your car, you recharge your car for free for solar and then bring it into work and they pay you for that energy to be able to use your car for V2G to power their business. It's like I see things like that in the future that's going to be fantastic for the grid as well.
100%. I think that'd be so cool if you could like bring your car, like you're at like 80% charge or whatever, and then you could bring it to if you're like going shopping or something, plug it in, and then you could actually get credited back to your account as you feed in energy. I think that would be really, really cool.
Get
Just
free
have
groceries.
some,
There you go.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think just like looking into the industry future, I think a lot of cool things happening. Like I think one of my like aspirations in life would to be able to have a house with home solar where I could basically charge the car from energy that was made right here at the house, which would be really
Mhm.
cool. But like you looking into the future with all your EV experience, it's like where do you see the automotive industry headed, and what are some of your like goals later down the road? Do you think you ever might want to upgrade the Model X as well, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, it's something we definitely want to do here in the future, and my daughter is here in another couple of years, few years. Um, we're gonna eventually gonna pass the i-Miev down to her.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of cool, right? So I think it's cool to pass electric
Mhm.
vehicles down to your kids. So eventually I'll pass the i-Miev down to her. She's super excited. We actually have fun pictures because we bought it like when she was like a year and a half old or so. So she's really only ever known that vehicle her entire life. She's excited to get it here in the future. So when she gets that car, we'll probably upgrade to another car in the future, which we really, really like what Kia has done with the EV9 or even the EV6. We really like the EV9 a lot.
Mhm.
So we're thinking about potentially going up to something like that. I'm not sure. Like the Model X is an amazing, flashy vehicle. I don't really want to ever get rid of it. I'd probably just keep fixing it and keep it forever, to be honest. But it's a fun vehicle. But I see the future being. I hope we get back to a time where we can bring back smaller electric vehicles. That's something I
I
really want
agree.
to see more. Because like I'm kind of sad to see. I'm glad to see all the big pickup trucks and big SUVs out there. Like they're needed in some cases, right? If you're, you know,
Mhm.
a a soccer family or a baseball family and you're hauling around a bunch of kids, or you're like us and you're in a business where you tow trailers, like yes, those types of things are needed, but I think we're in an industry right now where people buy giant SUVs and trucks just to have them with no
Yep.
not to use them as such. And it's a lot of resources, like 200
Mhm.
kilowatts, like it's a lot of
Well, yeah,
resources.
because that's the thing. Because I think about because like an F-150 Lightning, if I could afford one, that would be just like such a cool pickup truck to have. But that's like, how often am I actually going to use that for truck things? And then what might be the more sustainable idea would be to buy a smaller electric car, and then if you do need a truck, just go to U-Haul, rent a pickup truck for the weekend, tow your
Exactly.
stuff, then go back to your normal car.
Yeah, and that's not saying that everyone's going to, be able to survive on a regular basis with like something as tiny as the i-Miev, right? But I think there's
Yeah.
like a happy medium somewhere in between, right?
Mhm.
Um, I see. Hopefully, I see the future going with that. I also see a future where, like, where I live in Sacramento, we see quite a few Tesla semis driving around, right? Because
Mhm.
the the Modesto plant that's just south of here, the Frito Lay plant,
Yep.
they purchased a
I've
bunch
seen
of
them.
semi trucks, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
they drive up and down the 5 and then across the 80. So we see them all the time out here. So it's really cool to see electric semi trucks. I think up by you, I think the e-Cascadia is driving around and being tested out there as well. I think Kensington has an electric semi truck,
Yes,
and
because Freightliner has a facility. Because yeah, I,
exactly,
I
yeah,
I don't think I've seen them. I've seen semis though out kind of near Modesto as well. So
yeah. So I think I see that part of the automotive industry also moving towards being electrification, which is super exciting.
mhm.
Not just outside of passenger vehicles. Um, I do see people installing more level 1 stations in the future, more level 2 stations. Um, I'm also excited just even outside of the automotive business, we're kind of all encompassing. Um, I've seen a lot of stuff with electric boating too.
Yes,
I
that's really cool.
That's been fun. I don't know if you follow, like, there's a company called Aqua Superpower.
Okay,
They make
not
the
familiar with them.
You should look them up. They're really cool.
Okay,
They think they use tritium hardware, if I remember correctly, but they make EV charging stations that can be mounted like on docks and on the edges of
wow.
like waterways and things to charge boats. It's like such a cool idea. Like people don't think of being able to put these like super like high voltage charging stations right next to a waterway, but they've really designed their stations to be able to survive those environments. So it's really cool to see that part of the industry moving forward as well. I mean, we used to do a lot of boating, a lot of stuff growing up, and just if you've ever been on a waterway where um, there's not a lot of wind and things around because there's not really emission standards for boats, right? So if you're in a waterway there's
Mhm,
not a wind, a lot of circulation, like it's hard to breathe in the water sometimes. And so it's
mhm.
cool to think of like electric boats going in that direction. So yeah, semi trucks and the boating industry, I see all that going electric in the future, which is going to be really really cool to see. Um, the electrification of like passenger cars, I think that's just going to come naturally as those age out. Uh,
Mhm.
I see as the cost of those cars come down as well as used EVs come down, as people start being less afraid of purchasing used electric vehicles. I hope like what I've talked about can help people get past that kind of barrier of like the cost of battery replacements and how long do electric vehicles last, what kind of issues you run into with them. Um, just don't be afraid of buying like used electric vehicles. Um, if you see like the i-Mievs selling for $3,000, don't be afraid just because it's $3,000 that something bad's going to happen to it, because it's probably going to last you a long time. It's going to be a fantastic vehicle for you for a really, really cheap price. Um, so yeah, just be willing to buy the used electric vehicles. That's where I see the market going right now.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point to end on. I think used electric cars, very good deals now. Some people are scared of buying them, so I think that's a good opportunity for those who are a little bit more brave, or I wouldn't even say brave, a little more savvy. We could use that word instead, to just
Yeah.
pick up some really, really good electric cars for not a lot of money. So thank you, Richard, for coming on. I think we had a cool conversation about used electric cars, and yeah, thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Andrew, very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.